Kali is a Linux distribution that has tons of very powerful penetration testing tools. It is one of the most popular Linux distributions among pen testers out there, although it is not the only one. There are others like BlackArch Linux, Pen2, Parrot Linux, and others. Now, BlackArch has over 1,900 tools, and they're actually adding, periodic basis, more tools to the operating system. And Parrot is actually another distribution that has also many different tools, probably more than Kali. But the reason that Kali is probably the most popular is because it has a lot of support from its creator and the primary maintainer, which is actually Offensive Security. Now, although most of the tools that you actually have in Kali and Pen2 and BlackArch and many of these distributions, they can actually be installed in other versions of Linux as well. So you can install, let's say, Mmap and Metasploit and many others in things like Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE. So in many other different distributions. Now you can actually download BlackArch, Pen2, Parrot from the links that I'm actually showing in the screen. In this course, I'm actually going to be focusing a lot in Kali Linux just for simplicity, right? Although, again, most of these tools can be installed in any of these other Linux distributions. And also, may use some tools that you need to install in Kali Linux and that actually don't come by default in some of these distributions, right? Now, the folks from Offensive Security created a free book and training, completely free, that you can actually go over the usage, the installation, the configuration, the security, and also advanced customization of Kali Linux that, is actually fairly powerful, right? So kudos to the folks from Offensive Security for actually making that freely available. You can access those resources from the website that I'm showing in the screen. But let's actually take a look at the components, the architecture, and the installation of Kali Linux here. Kali is actually based on the Debian Linux distribution, right? So this is why you see most of the packages available in Kali Linux coming straight from the Debian repository. Now you can install Kali Linux in many different platforms, right? So you can install it in your laptop, in a desktop machine, in a server, in a VM. For example, the easiest way, probably just to get started if you're not familiar with Kali at all, and if you just have your laptop or your desktop machine, download something like VirtualBox, right, or VMware, and then you can actually even download ISO files or OWA files, so already prepackaged VM files that you can install in there. As a matter of fact, you can also download the ISOs and some of these OWA files and convert them into QEMU and some other formats, so you can even run it in OpenStack. For example, in my lab at work, we actually have several permutations of Kali Linux all over the place. It can from ranging to just bare metal, right, to VMs running in VMware, and also in OpenStack running QEMU. We actually also have even installed Kali Linux in the viral. Cisco actually has this virtual environment that you can use for practicing your skills and prepare for certifications and so on. You can even install it there as well, right? Now, in the website that I'm actually showing in the screen, which is kali.org, in there you actually see where you can download, Kali Linux. So you see all the different ISO. You also see the VM images, VirtualBox, Hyper-V, VMware, and so on. And you can also download them and install Kali Linux in an ARM-based system. So for things like Raspberry Pis, right, Google Chromebooks, Samsung and Acer, smaller ARM-based devices. You also can even put them in Solid Run and US Armory and many other Banana Pi, and many other type of architectures, right? As a matter of fact, in this course, I will show you how to create a Raspberry Pi environment that, as a matter of fact, even the folks from like Easy Council and everything, they actually prepackage, Linux distributions, like Kali, into a device that they actually say that they sell that is called Storm. But I'm actually I'm gonna show you how to even build that in your own, right? So basically, just buying a Raspberry Pi, a TFT, a touchscreen, a case, and basically just installing it. And for just a few dollars, you can actually have a mobile device that you can launch penetration testing tools from, right? So now going back to the installation, again, in my environment, I have it in VMware, in VirtualBox. It completely all depends. If you're actually just getting started and putting your lab together, what I will advise you is that, very simple. VirtualBox actually runs pretty much everywhere. Download the OVA file. If you actually want to go through the installation, of course, you can download the ISO. Now, in the GitHub repository that I created for this course, I list a few vulnerable applications and vulnerable VMs that you can actually download and install in parallel to Kali Linux, so you can actually do your installation, right? Later in this course, I'm actually going to show you some of the most popular ones, like the Web Security Dojo. I'm also going to go over WebGoat, the 10 vulnerable web applications, specifically for web applications, right? But please take a look at the GitHub repository, become familiar with them. One of the things is that you want to, of course, practice your skill in a confined environment. And whenever you download those vulnerable machines or those vulnerable applications, do not expose them to your network, right? They are, like the word says, very, very vulnerable, right? So what you want to do is actually have a private network, probably, again, within your VM infrastructure, whether it's VMware or VirtualBox or OpenStack, you put them in a private network and you actually, practice your skills in that safe environment. It is a best practice to use a non-privileged account whenever you're running a Linux system or any system for that matter, right? Or any operating system. Now, then you use things like sudo whenever you need to elevate your privileges to an admin or to root, right? Now, especially whenever you have a shared system that, multiple users are actually using that machine, or whenever you have exposed services that you want to protect, your system, you actually don't run everything as root, of course. Now, in the case of Kali, the default user is actually root, right? So you may say, okay, this is kind of like an oxymoron, right? But it's not, right? The reason for that is because many of the tools that are included in Kali Linux can only be executed with root privileges, right? So you should especially be careful whenever actually using Kali, since most destructive mistakes can occur when the operating system is actually running with root privileges, right? Now, also, Kali doesn't come with many services enabled by default, right? So you're not going to have SSH enabled by default or HTTP and so on. You may enable SSH or HTTP and everything with a service command, right? So like service SSH start or service HTTP or Apache 2, for example, start, and do basic Linux service management, right? In the first course part of the series, actually, I show you a lot of tricks on how to actually start and stop, services. If you're not familiar with it, I'm actually also including a link in here that will go into basic Linux service management, and also tools like the boot up manager and how to actually enable services at boot time and everything. We're not going to cover that in here just because of time. However, if you are exposed in some of these services, and especially if you actually have a shared environment, you want to use a non-privileged account, so a basic user account, to then SSH to the system, right? And you may ask or say, why am I gonna start HTTP, right, or Apache or Nginx? Well, the reason for that is because even for post-exploitation, so if you actually want to interact with a compromised system, or actually, have a user to potentially, follow a crafted link that you have created, or probably you're exploiting a cross-site scripting vulnerability that you actually have to redirect the user to to download potentially a file, a compromised file, or in other words, malware. You actually can pop up Apache or start Apache very, very quickly, or Nginx, and serve those files from there, right? So it all depends on the scenario. But these are actually kind of like Swiss Army type tools that are within Linux. Actually, as a matter of fact, it doesn't have to be a Kali that you can actually use for doing your penetration testing engagement. Now, one of the things that you want to really do, right? So in the real world, not in the lab so much, but in the real world, is actually you want to secure your Kali Linux or whatever you're actually using for your penetration testing engagement, right? So you actually have to identify all the ports that might be open. Don't leave just these services just enabled just for the sake of it, right? So use them or enable them for a specific use, right? Configure your Kali firewall. It actually comes with a built-in firewalls or even IP tables, right, to allow inbound connections on port 22 or 80 or 443 only. Verify that other ports are blocked. Also, whenever you use things like netcat, and you're gonna see this throughout the course, make sure that these rules actually in some cases you want to persist. In some other cases, actually do not want to actually persist upon reboot, right? So you have to be careful, right? You also, from time to time, install log checks for your Kali Linux. The worst case scenario that you can imagine is that you are getting hired to do an assessment for security of your client or your organization, and then something happens, and then another, device or another person actually compromises your system, right? That will be definitely the oxymoron that I was actually talking about before, right? So also try to penetrate test your own system before you go on site, right? So try to brute force your own SSH service, see if log checks picks up on this, if you actually, just basic normal hygiene from a defensive side for protecting your penetration testing, environment. Now in the enterprise, you can actually use things like the Salt Stack, right? And Salt Stack is actually a centralized configuration management service that manages, many minions. So there's a concept of a master and then minions that are managed by that master, right? So you can actually install the master package on a server that is actually reachable by all the hosts that you actually want to manage, and then the Salt minions, will have agents that will actually communicate with them, right? So each minion actually must be told where the master is, and you actually do this by going to etc salt minion and set the master key for using the DNS name of that, right? So in this course, I'm not going to actually go into all the different implementation and how to configure masters and minions and everything, but I'm actually showing you in here a reference also from the guys from Offensive Security in that training that I mentioned to you, that they go over on how to configure that. Now, in a large environment, let's say you actually are incorporating Kali, not so much from a transactional penetration testing, but from an enterprise-wide, a program, let's say for automation, to use some of these tools based or within your secure development lifecycle or SDLC, right? Or give them to your QA engineers so they can actually, be self-sufficient and find the vulnerabilities in their own, right? So many use cases for this, right? So you can actually have not only distributed systems and Kali Linux all over your infrastructure, right? But also you can customize those images and even install, your own tools. Let's say you actually created your own fuzzer or your own type of scanning utility, right? You can actually build this in within Kali and distribute it throughout your organization. As a matter of fact, my team actually has a couple of versions of Kali Linux that we actually have put in together with specialized tools that we use to find vulnerabilities, in our case, in Cisco products and Cisco services, right? So again, very, very, very flexible and portable, distribution. And of course, it's up to you to take it to the next level and be creative and of course customize it.